We know Voldemort pursued one of the Deathly Hallows, the Elder Wand, said to be the most powerful wand in all of existence. And the reasons for that seem fairly self-explanatory. Voldemort craved power, and the wand would have been the perfect tool he needed for domination, supremacy, control. And from the moment he became aware of the wand's existence, his pursuit was relentless. To Voldemort, it was the weapon that would finally secure his victory, the final piece needed to end the boy who lived. But what's interesting is that he stopped there. The Elder Wand was just one of the 3 Deathly Hallows, a triad of objects that, when united, were said to make their possessor the master of death. And if Voldemort feared death more than anyone who ever lived, if he built his entire life around conquering mortality, then why didn't he go after the other Hallows? How could the man obsessed with power and immortality ignore the one legend that promised mastery over death itself? Today we'll be discussing all of that and more as we dive into a question that I'm sure more than one of you have had over the years. Let's get into it. Hey everyone, welcome to another installment of Harry Potter Theory. Before we can really understand Voldemort's relationship to the Hallows, we need to go back to where their story began, with a simple wizarding fairy tale. The tale of the 3 brothers, originally written by Beedle the Bard, is a bedtime story that has been told to wizarding children across generations. It tells of 3 brothers who cheated death, and were each rewarded with a powerful magical gift: the Elder Wand, the Resurrection Stone, and the Invisibility Cloak. Together, these objects became known as the Deathly Hallows, relics that, when united, were said to make their possessor the master of death. For most witches and wizards, this story is as familiar as The Wizard in the Hopping Pot or Babbity Rabbity and Her Cackling Stump, another one of those timeless fables parents read to their children before bed. In fact, many of these stories are so deeply ingrained into wizarding culture that nearly every magical child grows up knowing it by heart. And while the line between fiction and reality was a little blurred, with many regarding these tales as nothing more than moral lessons wrapped in myth, there were always those who believed. Those who whispered that the tale of the 3 brothers wasn't merely an allegory, but a fragment of history, that the Deathly Hallows weren't inventions of imagination, but real, tangible artifacts scattered across time. And if these stories were truly as pervasive as we are led to believe, then it'd be a fair assumption to say that Voldemort had heard of them too. But here's the thing, not everyone grew up hearing those stories. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because while most magical children were raised on the tale of the 3 brothers, Tom Riddle was likely not. Riddle spent so many of his formative years in a cold, grey muggle orphanage, completely detached from the wizarding world. So while his future classmates learned about the tales of Beedle the Bard from their families, Riddle would have entered the magical world without that cultural foundation, without that quiet mythology that shaped how others viewed life, death, and power. And that absence may have changed everything. When Harry meets Dumbledore in King's Cross, Dumbledore himself reflects on this very topic and tells Harry that he does not believe Voldemort ever knew about the Hallows. And Voldemort never knew about the Hallows? I do not think so, because he did not recognize the Resurrection Stone he turned into a Horcrux. In other words, Voldemort literally held one of the Hallows in his hands, and never realized what it was. In the Resurrection Stone, he saw only a valuable relic of Slytherin's lineage, something ancient and powerful enough to serve as a vessel for his soul, not an artifact that could, in theory, bridge the divide between life and death. And he certainly didn't see one piece of a puzzle that would make him a master of death. So while Voldemort may have pursued one Hallow, the Elder Wand, the rest were never even on his radar, because you can't seek what you don't believe exists. Of course, there lies the possibility that Voldemort did hear the stories, either during his first couple of years at Hogwarts or later through his obsessive research into everything ancient and magical. But even if he had come across the tale of the 3 brothers, it's not too hard to imagine him brushing it aside. It's entirely possible that for someone like Tom Riddle, fairy tales would have seemed childish, beneath him. He considered himself to be extraordinary, and these were stories told to ordinary children. Even if he had heard whispers of them, he likely dismissed the Hallows as fairy tales, stories for those too weak to seize real power. He placed his faith in what could be mastered: Horcruxes, bloodlines, the ancient rules of magic. These were forms of power he could possess and command. The Hallows, on the other hand, were bound up in myth, morality, and meaning. They demanded belief, and belief was something Voldemort had long since abandoned. For a moment, just for argument's sake, let's suppose that Voldemort did know about the Hallows. Let's imagine that somewhere along the way, he stumbled across the story or even came to believe that the objects were real. Why then didn't he try to find them? The simple answer is that even if Voldemort had known of the Hallows, he wouldn't have wanted them, not all of them at least, because 2 of the 3 would have been utterly meaningless to him. The cloak of invisibility, a tool of concealment and self-preservation, would have held no appeal. Voldemort didn't hide. To use a cloak would be to admit weakness, to accept that someone else might be stronger, and that wasn't something Voldemort could ever do. And the Resurrection Stone would have been even less interesting to him. It was supposed to offer love, closure, and connection, all things Voldemort despised or dismissed as human frailties. As Dumbledore said, he would not think that he needed the cloak, and as for the stone, whom would he want to bring back from the dead? He fears the dead. He does not love. To Voldemort, death was not something to be understood or accepted. It was something to be defeated. And that's why the only Hallow that fit his worldview was the Elder Wand, the one that promised victory, not wisdom. The other 2 represented ideas Voldemort could never grasp: humility and love. He didn't believe in accepting mortality, and he didn't believe in the kind of emotional bond that gives the stone its meaning. He saw death as the enemy, and any magic that didn't directly overpower it was, in his eyes, useless. So even if the Dark Lord had known about all 3 Hallows, he still would have gone after only one. Because the truth is, Voldemort never wanted to be Master of Death. He wanted to be its conqueror. There's also the fact that Voldemort had set his sights on other ways of achieving his goals. By the time he might have even heard about the Deathly Hallows, he'd already discovered something far more concrete, a method far more obscure that, in his mind, guaranteed true immortality: Horcruxes. While the Hallows were wrapped in myth, Horcruxes were grounded in dark magical theory, ancient, forbidden, but undeniably real. And they offered a kind of twisted logic that appealed to him: divide the soul, anchor it to the world, and death can never claim you. And that was all Voldemort needed to hear. He wasn't interested in fairy tales about 3 brothers and death's gifts. He was interested in the kind of power that could be studied, replicated, and controlled. Horcruxes didn't require faith or belief. They required calculation and cruelty, 2 things he possessed in abundance. Each Horcrux was his way of defying mortality, his answer to the same question the 3 brothers once asked: how do you escape death? The difference, of course, is that where the brothers' story was ultimately about wisdom and acceptance, Voldemort's was about fear and denial. He didn't want to understand death. He wanted to erase it. And in doing so, he became its servant rather than its master. Interestingly, Harry actually thinks about this exact question in the Deathly Hallows, right after realizing that Voldemort is hunting for the Elder Wand. Voldemort had been raised in a muggle orphanage. Nobody could have told him the tales of Beedle the Bard when he was a child, any more than Harry had heard them. Hardly any wizards believed in the Deathly Hallows. Was it likely that Voldemort knew about them? Here, Harry considers the possibility that if Voldemort had known about the Hallows, then he might have gone after them. But that's just it. The fact that he didn't tells us everything we need to know. Harry gazed into the darkness. If Voldemort had known anything about the Deathly Hallows, surely he would have sought them, done anything to possess them. 3 objects that made the possessor master of death. If he had known about the Deathly Hallows, he might not have needed Horcruxes in the first place. Didn't the simple fact that he had taken a Hallow and turned it into a Horcrux demonstrate that he did not know this last great wizarding secret? But the truth remains. Voldemort literally held a Hallow in his hands and failed to recognize it for what it was. And his pursuit of the Elder Wand definitely wasn't about uniting the Hallows or mastering death, because he either didn't know about or believe in such legends. He sought it purely because of its history, because it had a reputation as the most powerful wand ever created, something that fit neatly into his worldview of dominance and control. So even from Harry's perspective, it's clear. Voldemort's ignorance wasn't just a gap in knowledge, it was a reflection of his nature. He didn't understand the Hallows, and more importantly, he wouldn't have cared to. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed the content, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, remember, it does not do to dwell on dreams and forget to live.